Hey everyone, welcome into another LoveTech video today. Andrew Loveland here. I'm super excited for today's video because we are going to be upgrading the 2010 Mac Pro that I bought off of eBay a few months ago. Now, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at my first video, definitely go check that out. I'll leave a link down below and also up above. Today we're going to be upgrading my 2010 Mac Pro with three main things. First off, the RX580 8GB graphics card. Going from a 1GB to an 8GB graphics card will dramatically improve the performance on this machine. The second thing we're going to be upgrading today is putting a USB 3.1 card into this machine, so we'll be able to interface with USB 3 and 3.1 devices. And finally, we will be putting NVMe storage using this NVMe card, which will go into a PCIe 16 slot. So that's all coming up next on this episode of LoveTech. Stay tuned. So as I mentioned in my first video, I purchased a 5.1 or 2010 Mac Pro from an eBay auction. Now, if you remember, that machine didn't show up exactly as advertised. I was actually credited $150 to my eBay account because the seller forgot to include the hard drive in the machine. With that money, if you well recall, I recently bought a 2010 Mac Mini. If you haven't had a chance to look at that video, definitely go check that one out. Today, however, we're going to be spending this video upgrading the 2010 Mac Pro. Now, as I mentioned in the intro to this video, I actually purchased three things that we're going to be putting into this machine today. Before we get to upgrading the 2010 Mac Pro today, I want to first talk a little bit about how much I paid for these upgrades. And this is something, again, you can do on your own. It's super easy to do these upgrades. Now, when I talk about these upgrades, again, I spent under $300 for all these upgrades I'm about to tell you about today. So the first thing that we're going to put into the Mac Pro today is this NVMe PCIe 16 card. Now, this one's kind of interesting because it actually has two slots for NVMe storage on it. On top of that, it also has a serial or an M serial ATA slot that you can put another additional drive in. If you want to use that functionality on this card, however, you will need to run SATA cables from the logic board to this device. However, NVMe storage uses the PCIe 16 bus, so we will not have to run any additional cords to this card later on when we install this. Now, the NVMe card I purchased off of Amazon for $26.99. Now, as for the actual NVMe storage I bought this Crucial P1 drive off of Amazon for $57.59. This is a 500 gigabyte model and has read-write speeds over a gigabyte a second. So I'm really interested to get this into the card and test that out. So the RX580 we will be installing after we make sure that the operating system or the Mac itself, that in that matter, can pick up the NVMe card off of this chip. Once we get that all put in place, we are going to install the RX580. Now, the RX580 is a really nice graphics card, especially upgrading from the one that's currently in this machine. This machine currently only has a gigabyte graphics card, so we'll be actually multiplying the graphics performance in this machine at least by an 8-fold margin. So that will be pretty amazing. So we'll run some benchmark tests after that. I actually ran some benchmark tests for this machine a few weeks ago, baselining it. So once we perform these upgrades, we can run additional benchmark testing and see how much better performance we will get. So I'll definitely put those numbers in towards the later half of this video. So the RX580, I actually was able to snag off of an eBay Buy It Now auction for $143.95. I feel like I got a really good deal on this considering a couple of factors. The first factor is this card, when I got it, actually had shrink wrap over the card itself, and it was original shrink wrap because it had holes cut out around the fans for that shrink wrap. The second thing is the back of this, if you notice, actually has the original plugs in the DisplayPort, HDMI, and over the DVI slots. So that's telling me that this card was either A, never used, or B, was unpackaged out of the box, put into a machine briefly, and then taken right back out. So I think we actually got a really good deal here because this is basically a brand new RX 580 card. Now, most of these cards even used on Amazon or eBay for that matter will go anywhere from $170 to over $200. So considering we got it for a little over $140, I think we got a really good deal on this. Now, putting the RX 580 in this machine will be a hefty upgrade. However, there is something that you should definitely know if you're planning on upgrading to an RX 580 or like card, and that is it does take additional power off the logic board and from the computer itself. So the card that I have in there right now uses a 6-pin to mini 6-pin power cable to get its power from to power the card. However, the RX 580 actually uses a lot more power because it's a much beefier graphics card. So the RX 580 uses a 8-pin to dual mini 6-pin power adapter, that is. So make sure you buy one of these before getting a graphics card like this, because you will definitely need a heftier power cord, that is, when installing this card or a light card in this machine. Now, this cord I got off of Amazon and it was $13.99, so not a huge investment there. We'll go through at the end of this video and I'll total up all of the costs again. And finally, the last thing that we'll be putting into the 2010 Mac Pro today for part of our ultimate upgrade part 2 is a USB 3.1 card. I bought this one off of Amazon for $29.99. And I thought I got a pretty good deal on that. And besides that, one thing that is important to note about this card is that it does not require an additional power source. So there will be some limitations as to what we can and can't plug into this without an external power source. So for example, if you're plugging in an external hard drive that does require an additional power source, you won't be able to just power it off the USB. You will actually have to plug that device into like an electrical outlet, because this does not take any power from the logic board itself. That's one thing to note on this specific card I got. There are additional ones out there. However, I didn't want to have to futz with a bunch of the wires up from the power supply and bring additional power down in just for this USB 3.1 card. However, it will give us a dramatic improvement when it comes to speeds if we're transferring stuff via a solid state drive or a flash drive for that matter. So another good upgrade to add into this machine if you're looking at wanting to add upgrades in using the PCIe slots on the logic board. So adding up all of these upgrades actually didn't turn out to be a ton of money. I actually spent for all these parts here in front of me $272.51. If you add that on to the original price I paid for this machine plus the solid state drive, which was $217.98, the grand total so far for this project comes out to $490.49. So we have spent under $500 to build a fairly decent machine for 2020. So with that being said, let's get into the actual upgrades. Before we do, I want to mention one last thing, and that being, what are we going to put on the NVMe drive that we put into this? So the idea, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on in the video, is to have kind of a hybrid dual boot system on this machine. On the solid state drive that's currently in the machine we installed last time, we have Mac OS High Sierra. Now, High Sierra, I'm going to most likely keep on this machine on the solid state drive because I want it to be able to run my legacy applications such as Photoshop and InDesign. I don't want to pay for those. I own CS6 and I don't want those legacy applications to go away in case I need to go and modify any of my files down the road in the future. So on the NVMe drive, which will be our primary drive for this machine, we are going to, again, load Mojave onto it after we put the RX 580 into it. And then after we get the RX 580 and the USB 3.1 card and all that arranged in here, we're gonna go in and actually upgrade using DOSDude's one patcher to Catalina on the NVMe card. So we will have this dual boot option system, and it will be pretty fantastic if you ask me, and it'll allow for a lot of flexibility to be able to switch between two different operating systems on this machine. A final note about the RX 580 card I want to mention is that you will not be able to see the poster boot screen on your Mac computer. So you might ask me, how am I going to be switching between these two operating systems if I don't have any post or boot screen with the RX580 in? To answer that question, what I'm going to do is actually, I can change the startup disk on the machine when I'm booted into one of the OSs. So that's what I'll do to get kind of around that, so I don't have to put a secondary older graphics card back into the machine. Now that, of course, again, is an option to do if we wanted to do that down the road. So with all the explanations out of the way, let's get going on this upgrade. I'll do some check-ins as I'm performing the upgrade along the way. The first thing, again, we're going to do is put the NVMe PCIe 16 card in, and then put the NVMe drive into this. So with that, and without further ado, let's get started on this upgrade. All right, guys, welcome back. So now I have the NVMe card and the NVMe PCI 16 card here. We're going to put it into the computer. I'm going to install this, I believe, on slot 3 of the logic board. That way we have enough room to take the original graphics card out later on in the installation process. So we're going to put this into slot number 3. The current graphics card is in slot number 1. So with that, what we're going to do first is open up the NVMe box here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the NVMe card and put it into this slot on the PCIe card slot reader here, and then we're going to put it into the computer, and then after that we will boot up the machine and see how this goes. Hopefully everything goes well on this. This I think is the most nerve-wracking part of the whole installation process because I've never worked with NVMe storage before. Now we have the 500 gigabyte NVMe drive put into the card reader here, and we'll put that in again to the computer in just a few minutes. So the manufacturer gave us a aluminum heat sink to put over the top of the card to help with cooling and performance on the card, as well as, I believe this is a thermal paste pad that goes on the bottom here. We'll put that on here and then get it into the Mac Pro. Alrighty, now we got the aluminum heatsink over the NVMe drive here. We're going to now go ahead and install this into the computer. So over here on the right-hand side of the Mac Pro, back behind where the PCIe cards sit, is this spring-loaded screw set. And what you have to do is undo those, and then this actually comes out of here. This is just, again, a plate that holds down your cards into place. After we take this guy out, what we're going to do next is over here on the left-hand side, you'll see this big fan. I believe this is a output fan that goes from the inside of the computer and blows air out the front. So what you'll see here behind this fan is a little button. Now, what Apple has done here is this is just an extra security measure that they've kind of put into place so your PCIe cards don't accidentally get knocked out of the slot. So besides the spring-loaded thing over here on this side of the computer, we also have this button behind here on this fan. If you push this button down and then pull back, you will notice back here in the back of the logic board, you'll see this little rod move out of the way. What that does is it kind of unlocks the PCIe cards that are installed and lets you take them out or put new ones in. So now we have that brought back. Now we will be able to install our NVMe card into the Mac Pro. Again, always make sure you install this the correct way. The correct way is signified by the pins on the bottom that you have. I believe it's 16 pins over here, and then you have all the rest of your pins over here on this side. So what you're gonna do, we're gonna put this into slot 3 on the logic board. And again, just be very careful when you do this. I think that's in there. There we go. Okay, that's in there now. Okay, so now we have the NVMe card into the Mac Pro. What we're going to do next is kind of reverse the process we did before. I am, however, not going to put the screw plate back on because we're going to be doing additional work in here. I'm going to wait to put this back on until the end. But I will actually move the fan forward again to lock that rod on the logic board back in. So to do that, we just simply press forward until that clicks and locks into place, and that doesn't move. So with that, now we have our NVMe card and NVMe drive on the card installed in the PCIe slot on the Mac Pro. All right guys, so welcome back. So we got the NVMe drive installed in the machine. I got this booted up into actually High Sierra. I realized after I set it before, it would make a lot more sense just to boot into the operating system we already have on the solid state drive in this computer. Upon boot up, as you'll notice here on the screen, you'll notice that it says the disk you inserted was not readable by this computer. That is a good sign. That's saying that the NVMe drive is being detected by the computer itself. However, it is not in a readable format, which is totally acceptable in this case because we haven't formatted as a Mac OS X journaled drive yet. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the disk utility. All right, so once we're into the disk utility, you'll notice one thing right off the bat. It actually is detecting two external drives, and this is a good thing in this instance. The first external drive it's detecting is the CT500, and that is in fact our crucial 500 gigabyte NVMe drive. What we're going to do here is click on the erase button. This will bring up the erase dialog, and what we're going to do is we're going to title this Mac OS Mojave, because we're going to load a fresh copy of Mojave onto the NVMe drive in there, and then it will give us the dual boot option. However, before we get to that part, we're going to first install the graphics card in this so we can install Mojave, because again, Mojave requires that you have a metal supported GPU installed in your computer. With that being said, we're going to click on the erase button here. That should format our drive in just a minute here. Once that drive is formatted, we should be able to boot off of the flash drive into the Mojave OS loader, and we should be able to install Mojave onto this machine again after we get the graphics card put into it. So we're gonna ignore that one. And as you'll see here, it's wanting to ask us about using this as a time machine. We're gonna say we're not gonna use this as a time machine backup. And as you'll notice here, it has successfully completed, says the erase process is complete. We can click done. So what we're going to do is we're going to now power down the Mac Pro, install the graphics card into it, the RX580, boot up the OS again, ensure that the graphics card is in fact working correctly in the way we need it to, and then we will boot off of the ISO Mojave disk image here, and then we'll be able to install Mojave on the new crucial 500 gigabyte NVMe drive. All right guys, welcome back. So I got the Mac Pro powered down, and I got the new RX580 card here along with the new power cable. And what we're gonna do first is I open the case up here, and what we're gonna do first is again, kind of follow the same steps we did before when we were installing the NVMe card. So to do this, we're gonna take out the old graphics card first, and then we're gonna put the new one in. So our first step here is, again, we're gonna click on the little gray button here behind the fan, and we're gonna pull back, and that will release our graphics card from the PCIe slot. Then we'll pull up and lift out. Before we lift the graphics card out here, we're gonna first want to disconnect the power from the logic board. To do this, all we have to do is lightly pull up. There's a little clip on there, and we have to push down on that and pull up. There we go. So now we've completely disconnected the power cord from the logic board. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to simply lift the old graphics card out of here, and then we'll be able to set the new one in. Now, this might be a little bit difficult. I remember taking out, this computer actually had two of these graphics cards in them before, and I actually had taken one out prior to doing any of this installation work on here, so it would make our job a little bit easier. I remember taking the first one out was kind of a pain in the butt, so hopefully this one goes a little bit smoother. So we're just going to wiggle the graphics card. It should lift right up. There we go. Just lift the old one out of there. And there it is. There's our old graphics card. We got that removed from the computer now, and then we're gonna just set that aside. Next, what we're gonna do is we're going to take the RX580 and we're going to plug in the 8-pin connector into the card itself. That way it can get power from the logic board. So to put the power cable in, there will be an 8-pin connector, which is right here on the graphics card. We're going to be putting the power cord into that. So I'll grab that really quick here. All right, so now I have the cord in the new graphics card. What we're gonna do is we're gonna plug the power cord, the 8-pin power cord into the graphics card. You should hear a little click noise. There we go. Perfect. So that is securely in there now. All right, so now we got the 8-pin connector put into the graphics card. We're going to then set the graphics card into PCIe slot 1 on the logic board and then plug in the power from the graphics card to the logic board. So to do this, again, super easy. We're just going to simply kind of line that up with the PCIe slot. That is securely now into the logic board. This card is actually slightly smaller than the one we took out. It doesn't have this big back piece here on it. So it's actually a little bit smaller. It is a slight bit taller, but it actually isn't quite as long. So it actually takes up less room inside the computer, yet it's more than 8 times more powerful and much newer. All right, now what we're going to do with that in place, we're going to actually first push the lock back in place. So we lock our graphics card into place there. And that is now locked in. We can see that this bar down here inside of the logic board is now securely in place, holding those cards in so they're not going to move on us. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the 2 power cords from the graphics card here and we're going to plug these into the logic board. Now they face in like this. So you want the pin side facing up. So I'll have to twist that one around there. So both of these are gonna go pin side facing up. We're gonna first off do the left one, and then we'll flip around and do the right-hand side one. There we go, that's clicked in there into place now. Now what we're gonna want to do with this cord here is I'm just going to kind of make sure it's laid flat a little bit more. Make sure that's kind of out of the way of the fans. So as long as it's kind of like out in this area, we'll be fine. All right, so now we got the graphics card, the RX580, into the PCIe 16 slot in the logic board. We got the power cord hooked up. Again, the power cord on this is an 8-pin to a dual mini 6-pin. It can be bought off of Amazon for about $13, and that will use up both of the mini 6-pin power adapters on your logic board, which is those adapters are located right behind PCIe slot number 1 on the logic board. So now we got that all installed. We're going to set the computer back up, turn it on, make sure the graphics card works fine, and then get to installing macOS Mojave onto the NVMe drive. Once that's installed, we'll come back in one last time and install the USB 3.1 cards. Let's get to that. All right guys, welcome back in. So we got the RX580 completely installed, booted the machine back up, and as expected, it does work. It works just fine. We're gonna take a look at the system profiler in a minute, make sure that it shows up as an 8 gig card. I'm sure it will, but just for good time's sake, I just always like to double check that I got what I paid for when I buy anything, especially when I get it off of eBay. Now, lo and behold, this did not show the boot screen when macOS was booting up. We do have High Sierra on this, and I know that is 100% not compatible for the boot screen that is on these machines. However, I have done quite a bit of research, and I do know that some places do say that the RX580 cards do in fact work with Mojave and later. So it'll be interesting to see if we get a full post or boot screen here once we get Mojave installed onto the NVMe drive in just a little bit here. So to go in and look at what graphics card we have installed on our machine, all we have to do is click on the Apple in the top left corner and click on About This Mac. This should bring up, and it does say that we in fact have the Radeon RX 580 with 8 gigs of VRAM in it. So with that being said, the RX 580 works great. We have the NVMe drive completely formatted into the OS X journaled drive format. So what we're gonna do now is power down the Mac Pro, boot off of the Mojave installer, and install Mojave onto the NVMe drive. Again, guys, if you haven't installed a macOS operating system onto a blank external or blank internal drive on your computer, definitely check out the prior video to this, the first in this 3-part series of upgrading this Mac Pro. That video will walk you through how to format your drive and how to install macOS on a blank internal or external hard drive. Before I get to installing the USB 3.1 card, the last thing I want to touch base on is what are my future plans for my operating systems, one on the SSD on this machine and one on the NVMe drive. Here's the plan for that. So over the next few weeks, what I'm going to do is my Mac OS High Sierra, which still supports 32-bit applications such as Adobe Photoshop and InDesign CS6, I'm going to upgrade that installation up to Mojave. After I get that installation upgraded to Mojave on the SSD, it again will still run the 32-bit applications. So what I plan to do with the NVMe drive, currently it has Mojave installed on it, but I'm going to use DOS Dudes 1 patcher program to be able to upgrade the NVMe drive to Catalina. That being said, I'll be able to have the latest, I guess you could say, latest release of Mac OS on my NVMe drive running at the highest speed possible. And then for those legacy applications that I can't run on any other computer really at this point in time, I'll be able to still run those off of my solid state drive in this machine. Now moving on past that, let's get to installing the USB 3.1 card in here. As I mentioned before, this is the last step in part 2 of this series. There will be a part 3 of this video, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that after we get the USB 3.1 card installed on this machine. So without further ado, I'm going to power this down and we're gonna install the USB 3 card and then boot it back up and make sure that macOS detects the USB 3.1 card. All right guys, so we got the Mac Pro now disconnected from all the power sources and got it opened back up. So now what we're going to do is install the USB 3.1 card. Now, the nice thing about this card again is the fact that it does not require any additional power from the logic board. You can buy ones that you can wire additional wires into the power supply or off the logic board for that matter. However, this one does not require that. So the disadvantage, I guess, to this will be it will not be able to power super powerful USB 3.0 devices. However, the nice thing about this is nowadays our technology is becoming way more energy efficient. So if you plug in, chances are like a solid state drive, an external solid state 3.0 drive or a USB thumb drive, you're not gonna need to use any sort of external power source anyway. So this card will work just fine for that. So inside of the computer, we have the RX580. Above that, in slot 2 of 4, we don't have anything. I decided not to put anything into slot 2 because that will give the graphics card more airflow and it will help the overall airflow inside of the computer itself better. So I decided not to put anything into PCIe slot 2. Technically we could, but it would be a very close fit considering this card is a little bit taller than the old one that we took out of here. Now moving up to slot 3, this is where our NVMe drive slot is. Again, the nice thing about this NVMe drive holder is that we can actually put a second NVMe drive into this card at a future date if we wanted to expand it. So again, the expandability of these Mac Pros is very, very great. Again, we have an additional 3 drives up here that we can add in hard drive or solid state storage as well. So the expandability is just phenomenal with these machines. And that's one reason why I love them so much, and making this into a media server is obviously the right choice for me. And then up here in slot 4, that's where I knocked the back plate out, and that's where we're gonna be installing our USB 3.1 card into. So with that, we're going to install the USB 3.1 hub. This is super easy. All we have to do is literally line it up just like this and put it in. With all the cards back in, we will now reverse the process in which we worked on before. For this, we didn't need to obviously move the button back here and unlock any of those cards because this is a much smaller card. It doesn't utilize the full 16 PCI slot. They believe this is only a 2 or a 4. I think this is a PCIe 4 connection with this USB card here. So we didn't have to move that back. So that's locked in place. We're good to go there. The next step we're going to do is add our back plate back on to kind of hold all these cards in place as a secondary security measure. So with that, we're going to put this back in here. And I believe it goes like this. I am so bad at putting this part back in here. I've struggled with this before, so I hope I don't struggle with this now. But it slides up like this. And then one of these did not want to screw in before when I was trying to tighten it back down when I removed one of the old graphics cards out of here. So I don't know if I'll be able to get both of these secured in here. They are kind of interesting, I guess you could say, to work with. All right, so now I got the USB 3.0 card installed, the plate back on. We're gonna put the cover back on the side, boot it up, ensure that the USB 3.1 card is recognized, test out a file transfer really quick from a USB drive over to this computer, and then we'll run through some benchmarks at the end of this video and then talk about some future updates we're gonna do to this computer as well. All right guys, so now we got the Mac Pro all connected back up, got the side of the case back on. We're gonna turn it on now, boot into Mojave, and then try copying across the whole entire installation file over to the NVMe drive and see how long that takes. Let's get into Mojave here and take a look and see how fast this is going to go. Now, I noticed this OS is loading much faster than High Sierra off of the solid state drive already. I've noticed a huge speed improvement already there. All right, so now we're going to take a look and make sure that the USB 3.1 hub is showing up in the system profiler. Then we're going to plug in our PNY Mojave bootable ISO and try copying the whole entire file over. I believe it's about 8 gigabytes in size. It should go really quick with USB 3.1. So with that, we're gonna go up and click on the Apple button at the top left-hand corner, go to About This Mac. Once we get into the system profiler here, we're going to click on System Report. This will bring up our entire system information, including all of the IOs and ports and things that are attached to this machine. So once we get into the system information pane, we are actually going to go down to the PCI tab here. And then we will see right here in slot 4, it is showing up our USB controller. So that is definitely good news that it is showing up off the PCI card slot here. Next, we're gonna plug in the USB 3.0 drive into the USB 3.1 controller and try copying across the Mojave installation file. So we just plugged in the drive. As you can see, it has shown up on our desktop here, so that's definitely a good sign. First off, we're gonna take a quick look at the installation file size on the installer. So we're gonna click Command I for information. And this, as you can see, is a 6.04 gigabyte file on the disk. So it is a pretty big file on this flash drive. We're gonna actually try copying this over here to the desktop, or actually not the desktop, sorry, that's my iCloud desktop. I don't wanna do that. I'm gonna open up my downloads folder, which is local, and we're gonna try copying this across from the USB drive over to the downloads folder. Let's see how long this takes. All right, so the file just finished copying over and it took 1 minute and 12 seconds to copy a 6 gigabyte file. Not too shabby for performance. To do a direct comparison to this, I'm gonna actually plug the same drive into a USB 2.0 port on this machine, and we're gonna take a look at how long that copy time takes and compare it to what we just installed to see the performance increase. So now I am plugging in the same USB 3.0 drive to a 2.0 port. We are gonna try copying over the same file into the downloads folder here and see how long that takes for it to copy over. So I'm going to open up the Mojave installer and we're gonna click and drag it over to here. We're just going to replace the current target one and start timing. All right, so the installer just finished copying over from the USB 2.0 port on the computer to my downloads folder, and that one took a total of 2 minutes and 56 seconds. So yeah, 1 minute and 12 seconds is definitely a huge speed performance increase over almost 3 minutes. So it's almost 3 times as fast copying over a 6 gigabyte file using the 3.0 card we just put in as opposed to using USB 2.0. So definitely a dramatic speed increase. Now that we've talked a little bit and shown you about how to get the USB 3.1 card installed into this machine, and then also shown you some speed performance on the USB 3.1 card, let's talk a little bit about some of the benchmarks that this machine has prior to this upgrade and post upgrade. Starting out with our Unigine Heaven scores, the 2010 Mac Pro scored 1026 on the Unigine Heaven score test.
Post-upgrade, we were able to achieve over a 128% performance increase with a score of 2,342. Now, while the 2010 Mac Pro didn't quite stack up to the 2017 iMac in this instance, that's kind of to be expected considering this machine is 7 years older. The fact that we got over a 128% performance increase by adding this graphics card into this machine definitely made it worth spending the extra $140. Moving on to our next graphics performance test, the Blackmagic OpenCL FPS 5:1 ratio test, we saw a dramatic increase here as well. Our pre-upgrade scores on the 2010 Mac Pro scored 67 on the 4K test and 269 on the 1080p test. Post-upgrade, the 2010 Mac Pro saw these scores increase by a total of 78%, with 120 on the 4K test and 480 on the 1080p test. While these numbers don't stack up to the 2017 iMac still, it's still pretty impressive that we saw a 78% performance increase here just by installing a $140 graphics card upgrade. Now, while the last two graphics performance tests that we did were pretty impressive, the Geekbench Compute Score test blew the last two out of the water. Pre-upgrade, the 2010 Mac Pro had a score of 980 on the Geekbench Compute Score test. Post-upgrade, it scored 44,836. Yeah, that's a 4,475% increase. Let that sink in for a minute. The thing that shocked me the most about this number is the fact that it actually scored higher than the 2017 iMac did, over 6,000 points higher to be exact. Moving on to our last test, this is the Blackmagic Disk Speed Test. This test tests both the read and write speeds of the hard drives and or solid state drives that you put into your machine. If this test made me realize one thing, that's NVMe drives are substantially faster than solid state drives. Now, a solid state drive is traditionally way faster than a traditional hard drive, that is. And as you'll remember in the 2010 Mac Pro video in the first part of this series, we installed a solid state drive in this machine. That's what the numbers at the top are representing here. So before we put in the NVMe drives, the write speeds was 113 megabytes per second, while the read speeds were 253 megabytes per second. Post-upgrade, this increased by approximately 700%, with write speeds coming in at 922 megabytes per second and read speeds coming in at 1.4 gigabytes per second. While NVMe drives are faster than solid-state drives, one thing that really did surprise me here is that the 2017 iMac, which my 2017 iMac has a Fusion drive in it, the speeds here actually weren't too far behind the NVMe's performance. To me, this was kind of mind-boggling because if you're familiar with Fusion drives, a Fusion drive is a combination between a hard drive and a solid-state drive. It's basically a two-in-one drive, so you would think the performance would be way slower than an NVMe drive would be.
All right, guys, so that does it for the video here on the channel today. I really hope you enjoyed this upgrade video of putting, again, let's recap, the RX580 and 8 gig graphics card into this machine. Also adding an NVMe card along with an NVMe 500 gigabyte drive, and then adding a USB 3.1 card. So we've taken this a long ways from where we started a few weeks ago. The next step I want to do on this machine, and I want you to leave your comments down below on this, guys, is what do you think I should do next to this machine? In my mind, I was thinking of upgrading the quad core to a hex core processor. However, there is the other option of me buying a whole new dual tray CPU board and putting it in here instead and making this into the 12 core model. So put your comments down below, guys, on that. I'd love to hear what you want me to do with this machine next to make it into the ultimate Mac Pro from 2010. And guys, thanks so much for watching the video here on the channel today. I really appreciate all the views and all the subscribers that I have been getting in the last few weeks here on the channel. If you like the video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. Make sure you hit the subscribe button at the top if you already haven't done that. And make sure you hit the bell for notifications. And we'll see you next time in another LoveTech video.